Welcome to the Matchmaker Mentor Podcast with Arlene Washburn, the show where love industry professionals, coaches, and matchmakers come to learn, grow, and elevate their craft. Each episode dives deep into the art and business of matchmaking, featuring expert insights, real-world strategies, and inspiring conversations designed to help you create meaningful connections and lasting success. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting your journey, this is your space to be mentored, motivated, and moved to make a difference in the world of love. Now here's your host, Arlene Washburn.
Collaboration is one of the fastest ways to expand your reach, access new candidates, and serve clients more effectively. It is also one of the fastest ways to create disputes, damage relationships, lose revenue, and expose your business to serious liability. The problem is not collaboration. The problem is that most matchmakers are collaborating without a framework. And today we are going to change that. Before we get into it, the standard disclaimer. Nothing in this episode is legal advice. The information shared here is for educational purposes only, based on professional standards and practices in the matchmaking industry. For legal guidance specific to your business or jurisdictions, please conduct an interview with a licensed legal professional. Let's start with the reality of where the industry is heading. No matchmaker has every ideal candidate, full stop. No matter how large the database is, at some point, a client's profile is going to be a challenge to match within an existing network. That is not a failure. That is the nature of the work. What separates professionals from everyone else is what they do in that moment. Do they overpromise and struggle, or do they build professional relationships that allow them to expand their reach strategically? Clients are also more educated than ever before. In the past 5 years, things have changed dramatically. They ask questions. They want to know the scope of your network. They want to understand how you will find their match if the right person is not already in your database. That is a reasonable question, and collaboration is part of the reasonable answer. Geographic expansion is another driver. Matchmakers who want to serve clients in cities, states, and countries outside their primary market need established professional relationships to do that responsibly. Specialized niches create collaboration opportunities too. If you work primarily with a particular demographic or community, there will be clients whose match exists in a colleague's network. The future of professional matchmaking is not isolation. It is strategic, documented professional collaboration. The key word here is documented. Here's where we need to have an honest conversation. Most collaboration disputes do not start with bad intentions. They start with informal agreements, vague understandings, and an assumption that because both parties are professionals, everything will work itself out. It usually does not. No written agreement is a problem. The conversation goes something like this. I have a great client. Let's work together. We can split the fee. 6 months later, one party says it's 50%, the other party says it's 30%. Neither party can produce documentation of what was actually agreed. The relationship is now damaged, possibly beyond repair, and there is no clear path to resolution because there is nothing in writing. This happens constantly, not because matchmakers are dishonest, but because the conversation felt easy in the moment and nobody wanted to make it formal. Here is the scenario that is less obvious but equally damaging. You have invested significantly time and resources into your vetting process. You screen clients thoroughly. You know who belongs in your database and who does not. Your reputation is built on that standard. Your collaboration partner does not operate the same way. Their vetting is informal, their screening is minimal. Now your client is receiving an introduction to a candidate who never would have passed your own process. Your name is attached to that outcome. Who introduced the candidate first? How long does ownership last? What happens if a candidate you shared with a partner 6 months ago is now in the client's package from someone else? These questions need answers before you share a single profile. Without documented policies, candidate ownership disputes are the fastest way to turn a professional relationship into a conflict. Circumvention. Circumvention happens in multiple directions. A partner may bypass the agreed process and go directly to your candidate. A candidate may bypass the matchmaker entirely and reach out to the client directly. A client may use information from your introduction to find their own path forward. None of this is recoverable without documentation that establishes expectations from the start. Confidentiality problems. When you share a candidate profile with a collaboration partner, you are sharing personal information, photographs, contact details, relationship history, preferences, health considerations in some cases. Sharing that profile without documented consent creates a privacy problem on top of any professional dispute that follows. Let's move to the compliance corner. Collaboration requires consent. Before sharing any profile, photograph, contact information, or personal details through a collaboration partnership, you need to understand your consent and privacy obligations. The IMC Board Code of Conduct requires that when sharing data within networks or alliances, matchmakers obtain explicit consent, disclose data use and protection practices, and allow clients and candidates to opt out without penalty to agency level services. Section 6.5 requires that referral fees and business agreements be disclosed in writing to clients before making a referral. This is not optional for accredited members, and it is identified in the code as a provision where breach may constitute a material violation. The exact legal requirement depends on your jurisdiction, the jurisdiction where your clients are located, and the jurisdiction where the candidate resides. But the professional standard is consistent. Document consent before sharing information, and document agreements before entering collaboration. If you are an IMC Board accredited member, your collaboration agreement and referral disclosures are part of the documentation that may be required and reviewed during periodic or random compliance reviews under Section 7.4. Your records need to be in order. If you are working towards accreditation, the documentation standards covered by this episode are directly relevant to the application and review process. Let's talk about what it looks like to do this the right way. Before any candidate is shared, any client is referred, or any introduction is facilitated through a partnership, you need a written agreement. This document defines roles and responsibilities, compensation, candidate ownership, how long that ownership will last, confidentiality obligations, and what happens when there is a dispute. A verbal agreement is not documentation. An email thread is better than nothing, but it is not a contract. A signed collaboration agreement is the standard. When a candidate's profile is being shared, that candidate needs to understand what is happening, what information is being shared, with whom, for what purpose, and under what limitations. Consent must be documented before the profile moves. Your clients also need to understand how referrals and collaborations work within your practice. If a client signs an agreement expecting you in your database and later discovers their introduction came from a partner's network they never knew existed, that is a trust problem. I know you're working hard to get a match wherever that match may be, but not disclosing this upfront can create a trust issue. Clients deserve to understand how their service is being delivered. That disclosure belongs in your client agreement and should be confirmed during the consultation process. Referral tracking system. So key. Document the date, the candidate, the partner, the outcome, the compensation, every referral, every time. When a dispute arises 6 months later, you need a record. When a candidate claims they never consented to have their profile shared, you need a record. This does not have to be complex, it has to be consistent. Data handling procedures. When you share photographs, profiles, contact information, or any personal details, you need documented procedures for how the data is handled on both ends of the collaboration. Who has access? How is it stored? When is it deleted? What happens in the event of a breach? Your data obligations do not pause because the information was shared through a collaboration. Let's make this concrete. A candidate is introduced by Matchmaker A and enters her database in January. In July, Matchmaker B places that same candidate with one of her clients and collects the full collaboration fee. Matchmaker A believes she had ownership of that candidate. Matchmaker B says the ownership period expired. There is no written agreement defining what ownership means or how long it lasts. Without documentation, there is no resolution, only conflict. Scenario 2. A collaboration partner shares a candidate profile without the candidate's knowledge or consent. That candidate finds out and contacts both matchmakers. Who is responsible? Both parties may carry exposure here. The partner who shared without consent has an obvious problem, but the matchmaker who received and used the undocumented profile also has a question to answer. This is why your data handling procedures need to include verification that consent was obtained before you accept any profile from a partner. Scenario 3. A client discovers that the introduction she received came from a partner's database rather than directly from the matchmaker she hired. She was never told about the collaboration. She feels misled. Clients have a right to understand how their service is being delivered. The disclosure language in a client agreement is not a formality. It is how you maintain trust when the reality of how your network operates becomes visible. I want to take a moment to talk about what we are building inside the Love Pro Mastermind Academy. One of the most consistent gaps I see in matchmaking businesses, regardless of how long someone has been in the industry, is the documentation layer. Matchmakers understand their clients, they understand their craft, but they are operating on informal systems that leave them exposed. Inside LPMA, you work through structured frameworks covering the documentation your business needs, including how to structure client agreements, handle referral disclosures, and build intake and onboarding systems that protect you and serve your clients well. The frameworks are pre-recorded so you can move through them on your schedule, but the work does not stop there. There are implementation requirements, reviews, and feedback on what you actually build, and bi-weekly masterminds where we troubleshoot what comes up in real time. You are not watching videos and hoping for the best. You're building your business with accountability and support behind you. Visit lovepromastermind.com to learn more. Before we close, I want to mention something we are currently developing. Too many collaborations fail because everyone had good intentions and nobody documented. I have watched professional relationships collapse over preventable disputes. Matchmakers lose revenue and reputation because they trust a handshake and skip the paperwork. That is one of the reasons we are developing a dedicated collaboration training for professional matchmakers. It will include practical tools, sample collaboration agreements, candidate disclosure documents, referral tracking resources, and implementation guidance built specifically for matchmaking businesses, because collaboration should create opportunity, not disputes. When the training is available, you will hear about it here and on the radar. If you are not already subscribed, the link is in the show notes. Before we close out this episode, I want you to sit with a few questions. Do you currently have a collaboration agreement with the matchmakers you work with regularly? If not, is that relationship operating on an assumption of alignment that has never been tested? When you share a candidate profile, do you have documentation showing that candidate consented to their information being shared? Does your client agreement include language about how collaborations and referrals work within your practice? Or is it something you explain verbally, if at all? Do you have a referral tracking system? Date, candidate, partner, outcome, compensation. If any of those questions produce a moment of discomfort, that is information. That discomfort is telling you where your business needs attention. Look, the strongest matchmaking businesses are not always the ones with the largest databases. They are often the ones with the strongest professional relationships. Professional relationships in business need structure, not because you do not trust your colleague, but because structure is what protects the relationship when things get complicated. And in business, things get complicated. The right collaboration can help your business grow, expand your reach, and better serve your clients. The wrong collaboration, or the right one handled without documentation, can cost you clients, revenue, and your professional reputation. Build your partnership with the same level of care you expect your clients to use when building relationships. That is the standard. Thank you for being here. If this episode was useful, share it with a colleague who is building collaboration partnerships.
If today's episode resonated, make sure you're subscribed to the Matchmaker Mentor Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. New episodes are released weekly and are designed to support professional matchmakers who want to operate with clarity, structure, and integrity. You can also join our monthly industry brief, On the Radar, for ongoing insight into what's changing behind the scenes in professional matchmaking. Until next time, stay grounded in your standards, intentional in your systems, and committed to doing this work at a higher level. I'm Arlene Washburn, and this is the Matchmaker Mentor Podcast.